everyone. Thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Here's what we're looking at. What Illinois' new lawsuit against the Trump administration could mean for immigration enforcement in Chicago. And a new report warns Illinois could face electricity shortages and soaring bills in the future. Are AI data centers to blame? First off tonight, the last of the so-called ComEd 4 has reported to prison for a 2-year sentence in a corruption scandal that also sent longtime Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan to prison. Former ComEd CEO, 67-year-old Ann Pramaggiore, has begun serving her time at a federal prison in Marianna, Florida. She was convicted along with Madigan's longtime confidant, Michael McLean, ex-ComEd consultant Jay Doherty, and former ComEd executive John Hooker on bribery, conspiracy, and willfully falsifying the company's books in a 2023 trial. The other three, along with Madigan, have all begun serving their sentences. Chicago's Office of Reentry is releasing its first year-end report. Tasked with creating and investing in resources for formerly incarcerated Chicagoans, the office outlined what they call their key accomplishments the past year, including establishing Chicago's first women-focused community reentry support center, creating a microgrant program providing funding to 32 organizations to expand mental health services and reentry support, launching a policy survey incorporating feedback from system-impacted individuals, and developing the Youth Reentry Guidebook to support young people impacted by the justice system. And that office's director will join us here tomorrow evening for more on their goals. Up next, are federal immigration agents operating with absolute legal immunity? That's right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Illinois and Minnesota officials are separately suing the Trump administration over the enforcement tactics used by federal immigration agents. The lawsuits seek broader limits on the conduct of immigration agents in both states. It comes after last week's fatal shooting of Minneapolis mother Renee Nicole Good by an ICE agent. Following the shooting, Vice President J.D. Vance said the agent was, quote, protected by absolute immunity.
The precedent here is very simple. You have a federal law enforcement official engaging in federal law enforcement action. That's a federal issue. That guy's protected by absolute immunity. He was doing his job. The unprecedented thing is the idea that a local official can actually prosecute a federal official with absolute immunity. I've never seen anything like that. It would get tossed out by a judge.
Joining us now with more is Chicago Kent College of Law professor Harold Krent. Welcome back, Harold. So, going off of what we just heard the vice president say there, do federal immigration agents have absolute immunity from prosecution?
The vice president is simply wrong. There have been a number of cases and judicial pronouncements that say that the individuals are not absolutely immune, and no Supreme Court decision has ever held that. That being said, the road to a prosecution by a state official is tough, and obviously we're not going to see a federal prosecution in this administration, but there could be a federal prosecution in a subsequent administration. And then there are some civil damages routes that are available as well. So there's a horrific killing, but there are some avenues available for some kind of accountability for what the ICE agent did.
Both Illinois and Minnesota lawsuits are federal cases, raising some potential conflicts with the U.S. Constitution's Supremacy Clause. What is the Supremacy Clause, and how might it affect these lawsuits?
Well, under the federal Constitution, if there's a clash between state and federal law prevails. So in going back to the Minnesota incident, it's clear that the federal government has the ability to have ICE agents in Minnesota or in Illinois, and that even if there is a state law to the contrary, the federal law would win out because of the Supremacy Clause. But in the same token, what Illinois and Minnesota are saying is that the use of these aggressive tactics, roving patrols, interrogations, the use of tear gas, is simply trying to bludgeon the states into changing their form of government, which is also protected under the Constitution in our 10th Amendment. So what the lawsuits are saying is that this use of aggressive tactics are trying to browbeat the states into abandoning their kind of sanctuary policies or sanctuary city policies to protect migrants within the communities, and that the use of tactics to effect that aim is actually itself a violation of the Constitution because of the rights protected under the 10th Amendment of the Constitution. So those are both unprecedented claims. We don't know how they will turn out because at some point there's a clash between the Supremacy Clause and the 10th Amendment. And so we're seeing that played out in both states currently.
So in Illinois' lawsuit, State Attorney General Kwame Raoul, he wrote that immigration agents, quote, have rampaged for months through Chicago and surrounding areas, lawlessly stopping, interrogating, and arresting residents and attacking them with chemical weapons. Can the state make the argument that immigration agents are breaking the law in the use of chemical weapons and so on?
Well, that's not what this lawsuit is about. There may be other aspects of the lawsuit to say that there are illegal tactics and there can be an injunction. And indeed, Judge Ellis just a while ago talked about the illegal activities or potentially illegal activities of the Border Patrol agents. But this is more of a wide-ranging, unprecedented, as I mentioned, lawsuit saying that this is really a campaign that the federal government is using to try to force the states to change their own laws. And when the federal government does that, that's arguably a violation of the rights reserved to the states under our federal Constitution. So this isn't about the use of tear gas per se or the use of interrogation tactics. It's really about using these kinds of tactics to force the states to give up policies, the sanctuary city policies, that they find very important in order to protect and then make safe the communities in the states.
Illinois' lawsuit also seeks to halt immigration agents from using such tactics as tear gas and other chemical weapons on non-resisting individuals and from entering private property without a warrant or consent. Does that part of the lawsuit, does it not run into the same problem that the Chicago Headline Club and other plaintiffs ran into with their case, which is still in a federal court right now because a judge decided that she wanted to hold off before granting the motion to dismiss?
Yeah, I mean, it may, but the difference is this sort of 10th Amendment rights reserved to the states part of the lawsuit. That's what makes this a unique vehicle for trying to test or challenge the policies. Obviously, we have individuals who are injured, including Renee Good, whose family, I hope, can either sue if there is no state prosecution for the agent. I mean, those of us who've seen the videos, we find them sort of chilling. Have no idea why the ICE agent opened fire when he did. But in a broader level, what Illinois is trying to do is say, look, on each individual, there may be an abuse of discretion. There's a trigger-happy ICE agent or Border Patrol agent. Maybe they can be sued under tort claims or for a constitutional violation. There's some problems with that as possible. But what this lawsuit is saying, as a whole, this is a pressure tactic that is being used against the states in order for the states to change its laws to be more friendly to federal immigration enforcement. And that's the unique kernel of this law, and that's different than what the Headline Club and others brought in the prior lawsuit. And so it'll wind its way through the courts, but it's an interesting challenge.
Of course, one that we'll keep an eye on as it does make its way through the courts. Chicago-Kent College of Law professor Harold Kren, thank you again.
Take care.
Up next, the impact data centers in Illinois could have on your energy bill. Chicago residents could see their electric bills increase by as much as $70 in the next 3 years. That's according to a study from the Citizens Utility Board. Researchers say the culprit is the rise of AI data centers straining the electric grid. As a result, some local municipalities are putting a moratorium on new data centers. Meanwhile, ComEd says it recently struck an agreement with several large-scale data centers in order to mitigate the surge in utility bills. Joining us now with more are Max Lightman, Director of Economic Development for ComEd, Sarah Moskowitz, Executive Director of the Citizens Utility Board, Allison Lindberg, Director of Sustainability for the City of Aurora, and Brad Tietz, Director of State Policy for the Data Center Collection. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Brad, I want to start with you, please, because there can often be confusion when we're talking about understanding data centers and what they do and what are the different types. So what do they do and what are the different types?
Yeah, so the data center industry, and it's been around for decades, but I think, it's only been until recently, like that we've gotten some, renewed attention. But the data center industry is powering our 21st century economy. So everything we do on the internet is powered and processed through a data center. So when you look at the data center industry, historically, what you've had is what's called multi-tenant and enterprise zone and enterprise data center. So multi-tenant, they're going to build to suit a building that provides the space, the power, the infrastructure for tenants, and the tenants can range from 1 to 200 tenants, and you might have banks and hospitals, governments, and schools storing their data in there. But then you get to the enterprise or hyperscaler data center, and those are going to be the household names that we all know, the Metas, Amazons, Microsofts, and Googles of the world. And they'll use their own data centers to process and their own compute and their own data. So really, when you look at where demand for data is going, the average household has 21 connected devices now in it. So when you think about all the phones you have, all the computers you have, your smart thermostats, your smart ovens,
your television, your iPad,
the list goes on.
That, your laptop.
In the next 5 years, we're going to use twice the amount of data that we've used in the last 10 years. And I used to work at the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce, and every business now is basically a tech business. So the technology and like where we are right now is so interwoven into our daily lives, and underpinning all of that is the data center industry.
Yeah, and then there's AI, which is a whole other level of need as far as data centers go. But can you tell us about how many data centers are currently active in the state of Illinois?
It varies. Different maps are going to have different numbers, and how you categorize different data centers is different. Most accounts will show between 150 to 200. I will make the point that, and JLL, the site selection firm, came out last week with a study that showed, 25% of the workloads actually occurring in data centers right now is AI, but about 55% is for cloud-based services, and another 30 or so percent is for kind of traditional storage. So I know all the news is about big AI data centers, but it's only kind of a quarter of what's actually happening in data centers right now.
Right. We've been doing it for a long time. Sarah Moskowitz, CUB, has studied the impact of data centers on utility costs. What did you all find?
Well, we know there's no question that data centers are having an impact on our power prices. The independent market monitor that oversees the markets that include Northern Illinois basically said that the biggest reason why our power prices spiked last June was because of forecasted load growth due to data center demand. So this is already having an impact on our bills, and I understand that data centers are important to our economy, but I think the way that our power sector has been regulated historically was not really equipped for the scale of this energy demand all coming online all at once. And so we're excited to work with stakeholders in Illinois to try to hammer out some solutions, because we need to kind of tackle this from every angle possible. There's things that we can do at the state level, there's things we can do at the regional, wholesale market level, federal level. It's really an unprecedented challenge, especially after a couple of decades of really flat demand for electricity. And I think that it's a real opportunity too to kind of work out some technological and some policy solutions to this issue that's already affecting consumers.
Yeah, you mentioned something called forecasted load growth, which I want to come back to in a little bit later. Max, if you would explain for our viewers though how energy pricing works and what's ComEd's role in that.
Yes, that's a great question. So on every individual's electrical bill from ComEd, there are three different components. There's distribution, which is the cost of getting power to homes and businesses. There's transmission, which is the cost of delivering power over long distances, and then there's energy supply or generation. ComEd is a what we call a wires-only utility. So we only own the distribution lines that take the power to the meter, and the transmission lines that move it over long distances. And so we don't have generation assets, and so we don't have any control or influence over that portion of the bill. But we are seeing really significant expressions of interest in terms of applications for power from large data centers, and so, or large customers, which include data centers, and they include advanced manufacturing and a range of other customers. So as a scale of, for a point of reference, within the last 3 or so years, we've seen applications for service that total over 30,000 megawatts of power. And ComEd is roughly 120 years old as a utility, and our all-time system peak is about just shy of 24,000 megawatts. And so what we've seen over the last 3 years projects, if all of those projects are real and they all get built and they all meet their maximum usage, we project to see demand that doubles what it took 120 years roughly to achieve.
And as you're saying 30,000 megawatts, I see all of you nodding your heads and understanding that is a significant amount of power.
It is a significant amount of power.
Okay.
And I think Sarah mentioned there's a need to modernize a lot of aspects around how we are addressing the challenge of the growth of demand, which also includes things like electrification and people putting solar on their roofs. We have made proposals at ComEd at both the state level with the Illinois Commerce Commission and the federal level at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, which try to adapt to these changing types of projects and ensure that all the costs are properly borne by the customers who are receiving that service, and that we don't see shifting of costs from one group of customers to another.
Okay, and I want to come back to that in a second as well, but I want to bring Allison in here as well, because Aurora implemented a 6-month moratorium on data center development. Why did you all do that? What were the concerns?
Yeah, we had a couple of different concerns about that. So Aurora currently has 4 data centers, and we have 5 that are in development. But we had received many different requests for new development for data centers. And at the same time, some of our existing data centers, we were getting some complaints from residents related to noise, related to vibration, and then we had some environmental concerns related to water consumption, and that would be for new data centers. And then we obviously had some concerns also about hearing that data centers were causing increased electricity bills as well. At the same time, Aurora actually treated data centers like warehouses. So every building use type has certain kinds of regulations, but we didn't have a definition for data centers at all. So for a municipality, we didn't have a way to put any kind of requirements or guardrails on data centers. We didn't even have a definition. So in order for our staff to take a look at some best practices and see what others were doing to basically deal with high demand for development, we put a 6-month moratorium in place on both data centers and warehouses. So
I would imagine a data center would function very differently and consume energy very differently from a warehouse.
Yes, absolutely.
Max, ComEd has made these transmission security agreements with some of the largest data centers in Illinois. What would those agreements do for consumers? What does that mean?
So last week we announced that we had reached agreements with 8 large customers, all of whom are data centers. And these are essentially long-term contracts with these customers for the transmission portion of their bill. And so what we're seeking to do is to provide a revenue guarantee so that for any customer or any project that we build, they give us a projection of demand, and from that we're able to calculate what they would pay in rates. And if the project meets the energy usage that they project, then ComEd collects that revenue and rates, and we use that money to build and maintain the electric grid. But if any individual project falls short of that projection, then there's a shortfall. But the cost of building and maintaining the system remains the same. And so essentially what has to happen is that that cost gets spread across other customers. That shortfall gets spread across other customers. And so these long-term agreements with these customers ensure that if for some reason they don't meet the projection of energy usage and there is a shortfall in the form of the rates that they would pay, that ComEd customers essentially are insured or they're held harmless because the customer will either provide those funds through rates or they'll provide those funds through the security agreement.
And that's sort of like the problem with forecast load growth that you mentioned earlier, Sarah. Tell me if some of this action addresses some of the concerns that CUB has.
Yeah, I think we're happy to see arrangements like that, and I'm glad that the utility is taking this kind of the issue of kind of speculative load and this concern that we could be building out system for data centers that don't show up or that don't use as much energy as they initially requested. And like Max said, that means in cases like that, that means the rest of the customer base would be left holding the bag. And so I think stuff like that is what we need to see. I hope to see action in Springfield that would actually kind of mandate arrangements like that and really ensure that data centers and other large customers have to put their money where their mouth is, and so that we aren't in this situation where you have a risk of the rest of the utilities customers shouldering costs for infrastructure upgrades that were made for a customer that doesn't show up and then is not going to be paying that off over time. And I think that's kind of how our utility system has been developed over history, is essentially that you will have current customers subsidize the cost to increase the infrastructure with the idea for new customers, with this idea that new customers would then help pay. You would be spreading out more kilowatt hours across more customers, and so that would actually keep costs down. But because of the speed with which a data center can come online, and like some of these hyperscalers can use as much power as a city, and so that's the issue here. And so I think we're going to need ideas like that, but more of that, and then also ideas that can apply to the wholesale market level.
Brad, why do you think it's important that Illinois invest in data center infrastructure?
Well, and there's a lot to unpack with all that's been said here as well, but I mean, the economic benefits are clear, and we're getting updated numbers soon, but in 2023, data centers added about $20 billion to our GDP here in Illinois. About 120,000 jobs have been, in and around the data center ecosystem. And importantly, for a state that has a lot of property tax issues, about $2 billion in property taxes, state and local taxes. So the benefits are clear, not just the underpinning of our digital economy, because when data centers come, they attract other kinds of technology businesses as well. But I think and I wanted to speak to the issue of load forecasting, and that has been something that our organization has been trying to figure out with PJM, because there is a lot of speculation in the market, and it's adding to the interconnection application queues over at ComEd. It's kind of painting this foggy picture that it's hard to tell what's real and what's not real. So we've been pushing for things around verification of commercial readiness for at PJM, things around more transparency around the assumptions they're using when they're trying to develop their large load forecast. So there's a lot going on there, but at the end of the day, the industry is committed to paying its full cost for service, full stop. And where this should be dealt with is through our public utility commissions across the country, and the DCC is active in many of these negotiations trying to figure this out. It's complicated, and trying to parse out these costs, as Max will tell you, is very, very tedious process. But the last point I want to make, Illinois, obviously we have CEJA, our Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, in place, which has ambitious climate goals. 84% of the renewable procurements done nationally in the first 6 months of 2025 were done by data centers. So if there is one industry who's kind of powering our clean energy economy, it's this one.
Allison, we've got about 45 seconds left. What kind of agreements have been made with data centers to address environmental concerns?
There's quite a few that have been done, I would say, on their own accord. Some of the large data centers, they see a benefit from doing things related to sustainability, especially because they might have an agreement with an international company that has climate goals. But by and large, there's no one size fits all solution for sustainability or environmentalism. I will say that since we started the moratorium, we have had one data center come to us interested in developing in Aurora that wants to become one of the most sustainable data centers in the region.
All right, give us a call when that goes down. We want to know how they do it, because that's where we're going to have to leave it. Max Lightman, Sarah Moskowitz, Allison Lindberg, and Brad Tietz. Thanks to all of you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that is our show for this Tuesday night. Stay connected with our reporters and what they're working on by following us on Instagram at WTTW Chicago. And join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm and sponsor of programming that offers continuing education to fellow legal practitioners in Illinois.